Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the Senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's episode of Kibbitzing with Kagan. I'm delighted to welcome Susie Turnbull, a longtime friend and an amazing community activist, party leader, and change maker. Susie, thank you so much for taking time to chat today.
Happy to be here, Cheryl.
So I want to cover a lot, and I have a lot of questions for you. Let's start with your childhood. You're from Ohio. Talk about what sort of Midwest values you think that gave you and why that made you a Democrat.
That's interesting. I grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland.
Where my dad grew up.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is I grew up in a two-family house in a very middle-class neighborhood where my parents both worked. And I came home from school to an empty house from the time I was in second grade. And that was so that my brothers and I could go to college. It was an important lesson that I learned. Primarily independence and also trust. My parents trusted me a lot. I always describe my childhood as being very lucky because I had unconditional love from my parents and brothers and family, and I had a large and very loving extended family.
Great. Healthcare became a policy issue that inspired you because of family experience. Why don't you talk about that?
Sure, Cheryl. I actually spoke at the Democratic Convention in 2000 about this. I am really someone who, my father was 45 when I was born, and he got ill when I was in my early 20s. A heart attack and a stroke changed his experience, and he could no longer work. He did not have adequate health care all his life, and he also did not have a strong retirement program, even though he was a union member. My father's disability caused my mom to have to quit work too to help care for him. And it was a very difficult time. My parents were ill for close to 15 years between the two of them. At the end of my mother's illness, it was just, she had been living in a nursing home for 7 years. And she went into a nursing home at age 68. So you can have a sense or it's at age 67, you can imagine what that experience would be like. She basically, when she died the night after a mastectomy, we realized that nursing homes across America basically treat residents for what brought them into the nursing home and didn't do breast cancer screening or prostate screening for any.
You got that changed.
And I got that changed in the state of Maryland. Going to see the then governor of Maryland, William Donald Schaefer. We went, I met with him with actually our now Attorney General, Brian Frosch, and former state senator Ida Rubin and former delegate Marilyn Goldwater, who at that time was working for the Senate, for the governor. And he created a commission on the spot to look at breast cancer and prostate screening in nursing homes. And a year and a half later, the protocols in nursing homes were changed. It's really a lot to do with what Governor Schaefer recognizing the importance of preventive health care.
Good for him. I disagreed with him on a lot of stuff, but it's nice to hear another good story about him.
I did too. Interestingly, we also shared the same birthday.
Oh, okay then. All right. Yeah. But you don't refer to the Eastern Shore as an outhouse, I'm thinking. And
no. And I didn't endorse George Bush either.
Exactly. So before we get into politics, you have done a lot of work on, because we're talking about your family, on your family history and genealogical research. Why don't you talk a little bit about that journey?
It's actually been a lot of fun. As I explained, my dad was 45. My father was also an immigrant. He came from a small town in Poland. It was Poland when he came. It is Ukraine now, and it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire when he was growing up, a community in Galicia. About 15 years ago, one of our sons was doing junior year abroad, and we traveled to the town that my father grew up in, and that started this whole whirlwind of following our family. Since then, I hooked up online via very coincidences and a lot of research with two cousins of mine who had been child survivors. I hadn't
Clarifying, survivors of the Holocaust.
Survivors of the Holocaust, yes.
Of the Shoah.
These were people who had been hidden in between two walls for 18 months in a farmer's home in a nearby town. I didn't know about these relatives. I didn't know I had any relatives who had remained in Europe who had survived. I knew all along that I had lost aunts and uncles and first cousins and great grandparents, actually, who were killed, not in camps, but in actions in their communities, just being shot at graves, basically, at mass graves. And once we were there and basically saw my father's house, it created this amazing magnet to learn more and to go back. And we've been back a few times, but my cousins were from a very little town, another small town about 15 miles away. And they didn't know that they had any relatives that had in America.
Right.
And we hooked up with them.
They come here
really
to visit?
Remarkable. They came here to visit, and one actually, just the one who was very engaged in all this, has written a couple of books about his journey. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year, but before he did, about 12 years ago, we started a nonprofit to bring back the Jewish heritage in the town that he was from. We with other descendants from that town, Jewish descendants, built a wall around the Jewish cemetery that in that town, and it has about 2,000 graves, which is very unusual for that part of Europe. And we're in the process right now of preserving and protecting the former synagogue to potentially make it into a local town museum. So it's very exciting, and through all of this, I have found a lot of family members. During the pandemic, I didn't do this, but other members of my family put together different Zooms, and I have been on Zooms now with my relatives of my father's that I had never known, and it's exciting.
Before we move on, in the area of Ukraine, in these communities, what is the tenor of those communities? Have there been problems with anti-Semitism or graffiti or attacks or?
Well, not in this part. It's really rather unusual. The cemetery where we have been working in Ukraine is on a hillside, and for some strange reason, it was far enough out of town that it wasn't. There's never been desecration there.
Good.
And the kids in the community have seen it more as like a playground, where they play soccer on the fields and stuff like that, which actually made my cousin pretty uncomfortable. His mother and sister were in a mass grave in that cemetery. So it was, that's what prompted the act
The
to
wall.
really try to
Yeah.
put a wall around it
Yeah.
to protect.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
There are no Jews. There are no Jews in any of these.
Right. So Susie, I'm going to cover with you your leadership in the Jewish community, in the women's community, and the Democratic Party. So we have a lot to cover, and let's continue with the Jewish community for a moment. So why don't you talk about, so you have been a leader in Jewish Women International and the Jewish Council for Public Affairs and Jewish Council for Jewish Community Relations Council, and so many organizations. You've been engaged, as I have, with the American Jewish Committee. Talk about what motivates you to do work domestically, and talk about Tikkun Olam and how you feel like we can make a difference.
My first involvement with the Jewish community actually was with a local Jewish organization, which is the Jewish Social Service Agency. And talking about Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world, that is really the place. When my father came to live with me for a month when my mother was undergoing some treatments in Cleveland, I called Hillel. I called Jessa to get involved, and for them to come and help for home health care for my father. And after he had gone home, I was so impressed with the difference that they provided us. I was 8 months pregnant and had a 2-year-old, and my father was living in my living room. And it was a tough time, and they were there. Jessa is always there. And shortly thereafter, I was asked by someone who was the chair of Jessa at the time, an old friend of yours, Gil Lisenko. May he rest in peace.
Yes.
Was chair of Jessa at the time, and he said to me, "I'd like to get you involved in a political campaign he was involved in." And I said, "No, but I'd love to get involved in Jessa."
Okay.
And so I learned about the Jewish community and the services that are provided in the Jewish community through my involvement with Jessa. And I was on the Jessa board for about 25 years, and I'm currently an advisory board member of Jessa. The other Jewish organizations I came to in a very different way. I was honored by JWI. JWI has a great empowerment program, empowering women to really stand up for themselves and learn more about financial literacy and leadership, but also has done an enormous amount of work in the area of violence against women and domestic violence.
So I have to say, I just had a Zoom 2 days ago with Meredith Jacobs and her team, and we're looking at doing some domestic violence legislation that could be groundbreaking here in Maryland. So very exciting.
Really, it's very terrific. She's
wonderful.
So I got involved in JWI through that, and I'm very proud of it. And it sort of melded all the parts of my body and interests, because it's leadership and it's progressive and it's also it's repairing the world. It's working with people who are needy and need help. The Jewish Council for Public Affairs is an organization which is 125 community relations councils from across the country and 17 major American Jewish organizations. And it aims for consensus. And it also works in a way that is not just aimed at the Jewish community, but working on issues like food stamps and right now ending mass incarceration and criminal justice issues. It has also been involved in really standing up for voting rights and working in building the coalitions on a domestic level, primarily on a domestic level.
Right.
And that's what my interest is.
Right. Before we pivot, you've worked on Capitol Hill as a staffer, as an adjunct person doing grant writing and ghost writing and all that. Why don't you talk about what that's been like, and also where were you on January 6th, 2021 during the insurrection? What was that like for you to watch?
I am actually a retired Capitol Hill employee.
Yes.
I worked starting in 1974 for Senator Howard Metzenbaum.
Yep. The great Howard Metzenbaum.
Um, until 1978, and then again, I went back in 1983, and then again in 2007. And I've been working for members of Congress again since 2007. Mm-hmm. What I do, and I have a master's in urban policy and from the University of Maryland.
Yay, go Terps.
And I help small communities and provide information for nonprofits and small communities on federal grant opportunities that are coming forward. I do that through in a written form as a newsletter once a month that is published by congressional offices. Mm-hmm. Currently, I'm doing it with Senator Mazie Hirono from Hawaii, who I've been working for 12 years at this point.
And you worked with Kirsten Gillibrand, right?
And it actually started when I was working for Kirsten.
Yes.
Kirsten was a friend of mine from politics. And when she was first first elected to the House of Representatives, I went to work with her as a senior advisor. And I'm in the office, and it was a time when they were changing earmarks and sort of diminishing the role of earmarks. They've just brought them back, as we all know, here in Congress. And so we realized she wasn't going to get all these earmarks, but I had this experience with grants, so we built it into her office program. She was a freshman and was at risk. And Rahm Emanuel.
To be clear, at risk because she was appointed by the governor. It was controversial, and she was from upstate, and they thought.
No, this is after her freshman year.
Oh, this was in the House.
Is in the House.
Okay.
After her freshman year
But in a swing district.
It was a very swing district. She had been the first Democrat in over 20 years, or almost 30. And so her district was at risk. And so this was there, and Rahm Emanuel was head of the Democratic caucus at the time. And he put together all the freshmen who were at risk, and they would talk about things they were doing in their office. Well, she told them about what I was doing for her.
Yes.
I started doing that for about 7 members of Congress. There's a rule that many people in this area don't understand. So you can't work at the House and the Senate at the same time as an employee. And so when Kirsten went to the Senate, I had 5 other members of the House that I couldn't go with her.
Right.
And so it was an interesting, it's an interesting thing. And so now I've been a contractor for the last several years.
Okay. And January 6th?
January 6th, I was sitting on my living room couch, horrified. I walked those halls all these years. And I had been there for things like seeing people laying in state in the dome, in the rotunda. I knew Capitol Hill cops who literally would sit outside of our offices, particularly when I went on the Senate side, because our door was immediately next to the entrance. And it was just horrifying. There is no way anyone can describe that anything other than what it was. It was an insurrection. It was a violent, unprecedented insurrection. Yes.
Okay. So let's move back to happier things, which is your incredible commitment and effectiveness at recruiting, training, and helping women run for office. And so let's start with being on your back porch when Emerge was pre-launched at your home a million years ago. So let's talk about why does it matter that women should run and that voters should elect women?
I have been involved in women in politics for a long
decades. Yes.
I first got involved when the Democratic National Committee, of which I was a member, created the Women's Leadership Forum,
Yep.
which was a place to combine women's activism with financial support for the DNC.
Was that Tipper Gore headed that when you first started that, right?
And Hillary actually was a great supporter, but Tipper was the and at a certain point I served as chair of WLF, but I also served as chair of the Women's Caucus of the DNC for 7 years, which is all of the women members of the DNC, and which is half the membership of the DNC. What we did was create programs to get people active. And what I saw at that time was really the beginning of when women started running for office. And all research and everything else tells you, if you don't ask a woman to run for office, she doesn't. Right. And you have to ask her 7 times.
So I have to tell you, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. So I know this. I have been involved in politics, as you know, for decades and decades. And yet, as much as I knew that, I was that stereotypical woman. I had to be asked by a lot of people over a lot of months. And it took 8 months to persuade me to try running for office the very first time when I ran for and was elected to the House of Delegates. I should have known better, but truly that's what it does take. And guys look in the mirror and say, I think I can be president or a US senator or anything with no experience.
Governor in our state.
Governor.
And I mean, it really is incredible. And I remember during the time I was at the DNC, particularly when George Bush was president, you'd see things where there'd be 15 men in a room deciding reproductive rights or women's health care or anything having to do with childcare. Or now every issue is a women's issue as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
And every woman has the ability to make a difference, and that's why we started Emerge. Emerge is a great training program. When I was chair of the Maryland Democratic Party, there was one female member of Congress, Donna Edwards, and Senator Mikulski, but there were no other statewide leaders, women, and women weren't running for as nearly the kind of in the numbers that were necessary. Right. And it's also the case that women like running up a ladder. They want to start at one level and another. And what Emerge has done is taken women who are interested in running for school board or for county council or city council in their communities, or county executive, and it's amazing because across the country, I was on the national board of Emerge, and Emerge across the country has reached 1,000 women in office who were trained to run for office. And look, I ran for office 3 years ago.
You're going to get to that, yes.
Okay, and there's a difference about what people respond to in listening to women candidates and male candidates.
So there's obviously been a huge trajectory, and now we have the Vice President of the United States, a woman and a woman of color. Why don't you talk about the importance of that?
The other day was President Biden's first cabinet meeting, and you look at that table, and across from him is Kamala Harris, and it really is the way it's supposed to be. and sitting at that table, I was a big, and still am, a tremendous friend and supporter of Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation.
Yes.
And there's a 38-year-old a gay man who is a cabinet secretary.
Right.
And you look and you see the Secretary of Defense, who's African American,
Yep.
and you get Deb Haaland,
Right.
another friend,
Yeah.
who's Secretary of Interior, a Native American. It is what America is, and who we need to be. And for all, we just watched the opening of the Olympics.
Yes.
And we need to be unified, because every day we're reminded how we're not.
Yes.
So see Kamala Harris, taking on issues that are the border and the concerns about voting rights. These are what she should be doing and what people can be doing.
Agreed. And let's see, the Trump-Pence cabinet meetings look just like that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, just like that.
Exactly.
So let's shift to the Democratic Party and your extraordinary leadership at the national level, the state level, where you were Democratic Party chair. At the local level, you were Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee chair. I don't even know what question to ask. How, why, how have you, what motivated you to do that? How did you feel that your leadership was meaningful?
I came to Washington with my 9th grade class when I was in junior high. Mm-hmm. And I always knew that I was going to come back to Washington and to this region, and worked on the Hill. When my husband and I settled in Montgomery County, and started, when we had children, we came here for the schools, and there was a big issue about school busing at the time, and a congressional race in Montgomery County. And I walked into the local Mike Barnes' campaign office with pushing a stroller, 8 months pregnant, and said, "I've got some experience. I've worked on campaigns before. How can I help?"
Yes.
And was like off to the
races. Yeah.
And I do this because I find it's fun, it's interesting, and it's really been my family.
Yeah.
In Maryland, in Montgomery County, and across the country,
yes.
Basically over the years. And it's people who I trust and respect. And I've had, as I just talked about my childhood, been being lucky. I think my experiences in our party has been lucky.
Yes.
People also say you take advantage of the luck and you take advantage of your circumstances. And I like to speak and to lead. Mm-hmm. I do. And fortunately, I bring people with me.
Great. That's great. What do you think is the biggest challenge right now facing the National Democratic Party?
I think it's the same challenge that is facing America. I mean, our nation and our world. I mean, obviously, COVID has hurt so many people in so many ways. And so I think, and Donald Trump unleashed a division and a just horrid situation that has divided us so into camps so unnecessarily and so remarkably. Yes. I am very involved in an organization called Integrity First for America.
Integrity, say it again. I don't know this.
Integrity First for America. Integrity First for America is a very small nonprofit with a very big task. IFA is supporting the lawsuit in Charlottesville against 24 neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and their organizations who engaged in a conspiracy to create havoc in Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. The case is going to be heard in October in Charlottesville at the federal courthouse. What Charlottesville represented, and all the Charlottesvilles and everything else since then, has been a representation of what happens when you have a demagogue, yes, autocrat leader who unleashes people. And I think the Democratic Party now has to stand up for our principles and what's right.
Yes.
And I honestly believe that we will win elections if votes can be counted properly, right. Without voter suppression.
Right. And that's a big if, unfortunately, with all these terrible laws being passed.
Voting rights is paramount to all of this, but it's also what's really paramount, and what is incredibly important is that people recognize there is a difference between right and wrong.
Yeah.
And there aren't alternative facts. There are facts.
Right.
No facts.
So, Susie, in 2018, you were tapped by Ben Jealous to run with him when he was running for governor, and to join his ticket as the lieutenant governor nominee. And why don't you talk about that whole journey from getting the call, deciding to say yes, and the campaign?
Ben and I still joke about this. I mean, basically, anyone, I haven't dated for a long time. I've been married almost 45 years. Mm-hmm. But when you first go out with someone, you say, maybe I'll just go for coffee. I don't really think I want to go for dinner. I'm not going to commit. And the first time Ben Jealous called me, he invited me to lunch, and I said I could do coffee. And I went out with him, and he had lunch, and I had coffee, and I was sitting there going, why didn't I have lunch? Tell me again why I didn't have lunch. And I walked away from that first meeting with him and said, I like this guy. I could support this guy.
Yeah.
And it took just a couple of more phone calls, and it was really sort of instantaneous. We joke now that we were Ossoff and Warnock before Ossoff and Warnock. Civil rights.
Just to clarify for folks who may not know, those are the two new U.S. senators who were elected in Georgia, an African-American minister and a Jewish activist, and it's extraordinary. They ran together as partners, and not sure many of us thought that we would have two victories down there that gave us along with Kamala Harris, the majority in the U.S. Senate. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And it really we kid around about that, but in many ways, we were in politically, we weren't exactly the same.
Right.
But we had the same values and interests about some of the greatest concerns. And I felt that in 2018, by getting more and more engaged in Maryland issues, local issues, issues of social justice issues, which is something that Ben and I absolutely share.
Right.
Healthcare, education. It's tough. Running for office is incredibly hard, as you know, as well as anybody. Running for office across the state, when you are a partner, not the primary candidate, is complicated too, right. Because your identification becomes part of with that.
Yeah.
Regardless of what your history has been.
Right.
I will always be Susie Turnbull, who ran with Ben Jealous.
Right.
Despite the fact that I was Susie Turnbull way before
that. So yes, you ran with Ben Jealous, but decades and decades of accomplishments before that. So you had.
I'm really proud of though. We
Yeah.
talked a lot about education. That was our number one issue.
Right.
And the legislature did exactly what it needed to do and stood up for Larry Hogan and did it, did what it was supposed to do. We talked about raising the minimum wage.
We
The
did it.
legislature did it.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's been, and while Ben and I didn't win, Democrats ran well and won races across, up and down the ticket in Maryland. And I'm really proud of that.
That's great. So you had never been a candidate before, although your name had been floated a lot for various offices. What did you think about being a candidate, and what did you like best, and what was the hardest?
What I liked best was meeting people who really were just kind.
Nice.
And really good. And my favorite moment on the campaign actually is a small moment, which is standing on a bridge over 95 with a handful of volunteers who were there protesting child separation in at the border and children in cages. And I told you earlier about my cousins in Europe and who lived in Israel, who moved to Israel. They were separated as young children and never recovered. And I always, and so here I was standing there doing that. Yeah. And when a truck coming under the bridge saw our signs and would wave or would beep their horn, the whole bridge would vibrate.
Yeah.
And that it was like, okay, this is worth it. They are paying attention to seeing somebody cares. And that was the best part. And the worst part was just general exhaustion. I put 21,000 miles on my car.
Oh my.
21,000 miles. And since then, in the last 3 years, another 15, showing the difference, like 5,000
right.
in different. It just a lot of exhaustion, and I think that's the biggest. That's the hardest, but it was fun, and it was. But it was also interesting to see, even in our own party, the divisions that could do.
Yes. Okay, I don't want to go down that road because we could be here for a while. But now that we're going to be done with 8 years of Republican Governor Larry Hogan, we have an open seat because Maryland has 2-term limits. Tell me what you think about the 2022 gubernatorial campaign. What do you see as our prospects? And have you endorsed, or do you have a candidate or candidates that you especially like or dislike?
Not endorsed. I am thinking about it. I don't think I'm not convinced that the field is completely, has been completed yet. I don't think statewide that we know all the races yet. And I'll be watching. I would say I am disappointed that we don't have a woman running for governor.
Right.
I am. I mean,
and no woman in our 10-member congressional delegation of 2 senators and 8 members of Congress.
Now, there are a lot of women who are running.
Yes.
Running for Congress, actually. But quite honestly, I am not going to support someone just because they're a woman either.
True.
And I think that Maryland has a remarkable congressional delegation. Really, I mean, we have Dutch Ruppersberger, who has become an expert in intelligence and cybersecurity and issues that are really important to us. We have Steny, we have, I mean, Jamie, our congressman.
I know.
You cannot
good
things about Congress's moral leader. I mean, it's just, you can't say enough about Jamie.
Yeah.
And so it's really unfortunate that we do not. I think there's a very big opening for controller. I think very likely that Brooke will run a very strong campaign.
Brooke Learman, let's say her full name for folks who are watching.
Delegate woman who grew up in Montgomery.
Very talented, very talented. I have endorsed her.
And lives
Sure, you
now
have
in.
too. Can we just give a shout out to Heather Mazier running against Andy Harris, the only Republican in our congressional delegation?
Sure.
So not endorsed. How do you see the prospects for next November of finally taking back the second floor?
Oh, I think it's going to happen.
Okay.
I absolutely think it's going to happen. Okay. I think that there were unique circumstances that elected Larry Hogan, and I don't think they're going to be repeated.
So let's just pivot to that for a second. A lot of people see Maryland as a bright blue state, really Democratic, and yet we had 4 years of Bobby Ehrlich and 8 years of Larry Hogan. We do have Andy Harris. We do have Republican legislators, and more plentiful than we might like, and in some districts that are a little more swing, where we used to have Democrats. Why don't you talk about, from your experience statewide, do you see us as a bright blue state? Do you see, how do you describe us?
We're bright blue in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and Baltimore City, and Howard has gotten there. I think every office in Howard maybe as well, maybe not in the House of Delegates and State Senate, but in the council.
Led by Calvin Ball, their talented county executive.
Yeah, so you've got this, the corridor, which is bright blue, but you go past the Beltway, even in Montgomery County, and you have a purple state, or a red state. And I don't think that's going to change much. A long time ago, someone told me it depends on how many Starbucks you have in your district. So whether, and it could also be Whole Foods for that matter. But it's interesting in our state. I thought last year it was great that Talbot voted for Biden. That was, thank you, Eastern Shore. And that was a big step.
That was great.
That county. And you're going to see changes, I think, in Charles and in Calvert. People are moving from down into southern Maryland.
Georges County.
As people go further and further out. But we're a purple state outside, or we're a red state in a lot of communities.
Right. Just a couple more questions before we get to our Fast Five and wrap up. What are you proudest of the accomplishment of the Biden-Harris administration? And is there something you're hoping for, a disappointment for the moment, or something you think they haven't yet done?
I love that they've gotten vaccines out, and I love that they got the child care tax credit. I love both things for people who need it.
Perfect. What do you like best about being a grandma? That's a big part of the joy in your life right now, right?
Yeah, it is. I think the greatest joy partially is to see, in my case, watching my sons be wonderful fathers.
Nice. That's fantastic.
And these amazing children who love them unconditionally as I love them.
That's great. And the last question before we go to Fast Five, you have an amazing spouse and partner in wonderful Bruce. What is, and you mentioned 45 years, what is, or did you say 45, 42? What is your secret to a happy marriage that you'd like to share here?
Oh, interesting, Cheryl. I don't think there's any secrets. I think it's trust, honesty, friendship. In our case, common interests.
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Okay. So Susie Turnbull, your fast five. 5 quick questions to let people get to know you better. So first, and I think I know the answer to this one, but what's a hobby that you've taken up recently that makes you happy?
Silversmith, and I'm wearing my earrings.
Yay.
I've been doing it for several years, and unfortunately my studio is closed because of COVID, but it's fun.
It's great. You have traveled around the state of Maryland. What is your favorite place in Maryland?
Actually, I think Brookside Gardens, which is a beautiful, beautiful park in Montgomery County that I just discovered walking there.
Nice. I had my beautiful wedding there, actually. It was yeah, perfect place, great place to go. Tell us an item that is on your bucket list that you hope and plan to accomplish.
I want to go to Iceland.
Why?
I love the mountains, and I love I want to see the geography of it, and I think it would be fun, and it's not that far, and I want to go to Iceland.
Great, great. What do you have a motto that inspires you, lifts you up?
I probably don't. I do have a couple of things that are like, it is what it is. It's like, okay, well, it is what it is.
Right.
I think that's probably the closest.
Okay. President Mike Miller used to say that. That was a Millerism. Yeah. And the last question, Susie Turnbull, the one that I ask everyone. What is your hidden secret superpower? What is a skill or talent that you have that most folks can't do?
Secret power. I can, having worked on Capitol Hill for as long as I can hear anything in a room that is being said, whether or not I'm in that conversation. But the other secret superpower is I can look at the Washington Post Sunday magazine comparison of 2 pictures and find all 12 every single week.
Wow, that's hard. Actually,
I'm a good editor.
Good editor, and that's an extraordinary attention to detail because those are pretty subtle items. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an interior designer, so I had to learn to see the difference between an eighth of an inch. You know, so to make sure things would fit.
Fabulous. Well, Susie, I adore you and admire you, and thank you for all that you have done to lift up women, to engage in and lead the Jewish community, to be a trailblazer in the Democratic Party, and everything you have done for Tikkun Olam, to repair the world and make this a better place. It's been really wonderful to kibitz with you today.
Well, there's nothing. I actually call my Zazzle mug thing kibitzers.
There you go.
You can create products too.
All right. Well, hope to see you again soon in person. Stay well. Stay safe.